Hey guys, this is Tauna. Today we're going to be talking about upgrading or building your commander mana base cheap, because one of the worst things that my brother tends to do is go and add $100 lands each time he ends up building a new precon, or, you know, upgrading a precon or building a new mana base and stuff. You know, it's not as easy, and there's some that you guys potentially have kind of overlooked that could potentially be very useful within your actual deck. So before we get into it, generally precons in the last couple of years haven't had awful mana bases. The upcoming Bloomburrow ones are actually really decent mana bases. They can use some upgrades still, but even then, like, you know, older precons, you know, a couple years back, they did not have great mana bases. There are still precons that will come out that will not have some great mana bases. So this is a great way for you to look at some upgrades for them. If you're building a mana base, you want as many lands that come in untapped as possible to keep up the tempo, which we'll talk about a few of those in here, as well as, you know, while precons are getting better, that means that those good lands are getting reprints, which means you can take those reprints and put them back into your older decks if you like. There's some that are, you know, getting reprinted that have dropped down a lot, like for example the Pain lands here. They've dropped down a lot in price, which is really, really great. All right, so before we get, you know, into the other lands, some common commander lands that you should make sure that you most likely get, like most of the time you want to have these in there, is, you know, Path of Ancestry. I think works really well in any kind of tribal deck, or even if you've got, like, you know, a side tribal. So like if your deck is mostly built around spell slingers, but then you've got, like, you know, a majority of wizards or something, then Path of Ancestry might be useful for there. It's just a card to kind of keep in mind. Command Tower should be in nearly every deck, right? Like no matter what you're kind of building, as long as it's more than one color, it's probably going to be worthwhile having that in there. We've got Secluded Courtyard. Now, this one is specifically built around creature around creature types. So this one here, you more likely want to go if you're going like a full kind of tribal deck. It does come in untapped though, but like if you've got a Merfolk deck, a Dinosaur deck, a Dragon deck, or whatever, Secluded Courtyard is going to be great in there. And then Exotic Orchard, especially in Commander, it's not awful because very likely there'll be someone using at least a color that overlaps with yours. And it just allows you to be able to have a very cheap untapped land that comes in that can give you mana that is very, very likely to be useful. Some other ones in here, Rogue's Passage generally can go into any kind of deck that's based around wanting to get something into combat. There is a lot of uses for it. It does obviously not tap for any colored mana, but still useful. Unclaimed Territory comes in around and going to be able to be based around creatures as well. But it does come in untapped, which is really, really useful. Reliquary Tower, if you've got a lot of card draw, definitely worth having that in there. Temple of False Chords, I think, is a trap in a lot of decks. It doesn't tap for any colored mana. It needs 5 or more lands. It kind of feels bad when it comes out, but there is definitely some uses and some decks that will be happy to run it. Just a lot of my decks, I find, if I draw it early on, then it feels like a dead card that I'm drawing. While it could be useful later, yeah, it's kind of one of those cards that is one of the first lands that I look at when I'm upgrading a precon that I might replace with a better kind of untapped colored land. All right, so going into some fast lands are definitely something you should keep in mind. They've been reprinted in recent precons and with OTJ as well. They obviously early on in the game, they're going to be coming in untapped, which is really, really great. However, later on they will come in tapped, but by that point it's less of a tempo hit to have a land that comes in comes in tapped, because of the fact that you already will have other lands out. It's kind of like that where you have like 2-3 lands out, like where it's going to be more painful, but later on it's not as bad. I personally think that it's just a really great, easy upgrade choice. We've got the Pain lands. They've dropped a bunch because they've been included in a lot of Precons lately, which is really, really good. These are honestly great, especially with Commander. You've got a 40 life pool, so you've got enough room to be able to take that 1 damage, and or you know, if you already have colored land and you just need the colorless for something, then you've got that option there too. As I said, because they've been reprinted in Precons a lot lately, they are dropped a lot, which is really good. We've got the fetchable duels. Now, these obviously have the disadvantage of coming in tapped, but they do have the advantage of being fetchable, right? So this one here is a swamp forest. If you've got a card that fetches for a forest, then it can fetch for this, as long as it's not a basic forest that it's fetching for. So there's a lot of really nice cards that you can use that, like, you know, allow you to be able to fetch certain land types. So being able to fetch this when you go to look for a forest, and generally those are putting the card out on the field tapped anyway, so it doesn't matter as much if it is tapped. We've got the artifact duels here. So these are great for any artifact decks or decks that care about artifacts, right? They do, unfortunately, again, come in tapped. Most of them are indestructible, but they do have the ability to be able to buff anything up that relies on artifacts. It's like, if you have artifacts or anything, you've got a great, like, you know, usage for these. We've got the reveal lands. Again, these are super easy to achieve. They're also very cheap. Again, they've been reprinted in a lot of Precons. So you're going to hear that a lot, is that, you know, some of these nice lands that I'm talking about here, they're cheap, but they're cheap because they've been reprinted in Precons recently. But at least, you know, that means that if you're upgrading an older deck or building a mana base for a deck that, you know, you haven't built one for, you've got the option of these really great kind of reprinted to hell but decent lands. So this one here, you just need to reveal a swamp or a mountain from your hand when you play it. So it's really great, like on a turn 1, right? You turn 1, you've got your 7 cards in your hand, you've got a swamp in your hand, and you've got this in your hand. You can play this, reveal that swamp, and then it's really nice. We've got the check lands. Again, these are relatively easy to achieve, especially because they are just checking for a forest or a plains, right? They don't even need to be a basic one. So if you've got like one of those duels that we talked about earlier on that are like, you know, dual forest swamp, then they'll come in untapped. We've got the battle lands. So this is only half a cycle. There's only the allied colors, unfortunately, but they are fetchable and they are very cheap. So stuff like Cinderglade enters untapped unless you enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basics. So these are, like, you know, slower, and they are really nice. And again, they are fetchable. We've got the Restless Creature lands. So these ones here, I believe, are mostly from LCI. They do enter tapped, but they've got the great advantage here of they have like a combat bonus. So it's like whenever you attack, get +1/+1, or whenever you attack, mill a player. And those are based off of whatever they are. So this one here is green-white, which is based around, you know, going wide and stuff, or getting +1/+1s and buffing up your creatures. So it's got a basis around that. Now, my brother informed me that you can actually do this part here, the turn it into a llama infinitely. The turning it into a creature won't happen again, but this part here stacks up each time you do it. So, like, for example, this one here, if you do this twice, so you're spending 8 mana on it, then it's going to give +2/+2 to other creatures you control each time you attack. I don't understand why that works. That's above me. I got to look into that more, but he informed me that that's how it works, and that is honestly bonkers. All right, we've got the Desert Pingers. So these are all deserts. They aren't the best. They aren't the best. They do enter tapped, and unfortunately, they aren't fetchable or anything. But the biggest draw is that they are very cheap, and they do that ping for 1, which could potentially be useful, especially if you're playing with like the new lizards or something, where they rely on opponents having taken damage. This is a great way to just deal a little bit of damage at the start. The Modern Horizons 3 dual face cards. I did not expect these to be as cheap as they are. They are all relatively cheap right now. I think that they are almost all under $1. I think there's 1 or 2 that are above $1. There is both dual colored and single colored options for them. So all the dual colored will have, like, they enter tapped on the other side, but you've got, like, you know, this here is search for an instant or card with flash. You've got, like, you know, the fact that they are cheap, they've got dual faces. So when you bring them, when you draw them, you've got the option of either, do I need the land right now, or can I play this for a better benefit on the other side? Really, really great. Now, the mono colored ones do deal 3 damage to you if you want them to enter untapped. That's the downside, but you know, at least that way they can enter untapped, or you can just enter them tapped if you need. All right, I've got the filter lands. So these are the enemy colored ones, are all relatively cheap. The non-enemy ones. So these are the enemy colored ones. The non-enemy colored ones, the allied ones, are not cheap. But these ones here have all been reprinted recently in OTC. I believe they might have been reprinted in Bloomburrow as well, or at least some of them were. But either way, you know, they've dropped down a lot. So these ones here, the Fetid Heath, the Cascade Bluffs, Twilight Mire, Rugged Prairie, and Flooded Grove are all really cheap and great to grab. And then they've also got the Odyssey filter lands, which are pay 1 and taps for 2 different colors. These are the other versions of filter lands. Again, these are all very cheap. They've been printed in so many precons lately, and they are very nice. We've got the bounce lands. So these tap for 2, similar to these Odyssey filter lands, but you don't need to pay 1 to tap them. But you do need to return a land to your hand. But you can return a land that you've already used on this turn. So say, for example, you've got, you know, you've got your mountain out there, you tap it, you play a card, and then you play this Boros Garrison, return that back to your hand, and boom, now you've got a card out, and it's not costing you too much tempo, and the fact that it taps for 2, as well as the fact that you can use that mountain from your hand now later on. The Capena Sacks fetches, this is probably what drove me to make this video, because I just think that not enough people use them, and they are honestly amazing. If you want a fetch land that's cheap, these are really, really great. Now, they can only fetch basics, but that's not too bad, because, you know, they don't even need to be in a 3-color deck. You can put these into a 2-color deck. If you've got, say, for example, you've got just a Silencia deck, which is just green-white, you can still play this in that, because it doesn't actually have the color identity of anything. These don't have a color identity. There's also so many ways that you can abuse these. They get instantly sacked when they enter, but if you've got anything that plays lands from the graveyard or has landfall, you can make use of these so well, because you can, you know, play it, that's 1 landfall, it goes to the graveyard, you play whatever the basic mountain, so that's 2 landfall. Then in your next turn, you play this from the graveyard. Boom, 1, 2 landfalls each turn, as long as you've got, you know, just plain, like basic mountains, forests, and plains in there. So these are the OG tri-lands. These generally come in every 3-color precon, but I wanted to kind of bring them up because they are still nice. They obviously have some disadvantages compared to like these tri-lands from Capena. They're not fetchable because they don't have the land types and they don't have the cycling on them, but they at least give you all 3 colors, and they are, you know, useful because of that, and worth mentioning because of that if you are building a 3-color deck. The Panoramas, again, these are similar to the Capena Sacks lands, but you do need to pay 1 to be able to sack it, unfortunately. But you also have the option of keeping these around if you just need the colorless and you don't need to sack it straight away, and then you can sack it later on. The landscapes, they're the exact same, except they don't cost that 1 to be able to sack it, but you do have the cycling option on here as well. So if you've got a deck, again, that wants to play graveyard, lands from the graveyard or something, you've got the option there. The Thriving Cycle. So these were reprinted so much, especially in like Jumpstart. They are all relatively cheap as well because of that. I was going to put the Baldur's Gate gates in here, but they ended up going up in price apparently. So these all choose a color as it enters, except for the one that it taps for. They do untapped, unfortunately, but they are very cheap and they're very easy for mana fixing. If you've got, you know, a 3-color deck, you've got your Thriving Island in your hand, you have no red out there, you can play it, choose red as your color, boom, right? Like, you can just use these very well, and again, they are very cheap. So if you are building a 3-color deck on the cheap, this is a great option. So these are some other ones that are very cheap that will also, you know, give you other like mana color, and you can, you know, choose it. So we've got the Cactus Preserve here. Does enter tapped, but when it taps, you can tap it for any color of any type of land that you could produce. So if you've got, all your colors out already, this is going to enter, and then you can tap it for all the colors you want. Unfortunately, again, enters tapped, but it's got that kind of versatility at least there. The public through fair here. I actually really like this one. You can sack it unless you tap. You have to sack it unless you tap an untapped artifact or land. So you've got so many different colors you can make from this. And it's, again, a very, very cheap card, so you can make use of that. And then Spire of Industry. If you've got an artifact, this is a great way to be able to get a very cheap way to mana fix yourself. The Grey Havens and Great Hall of Citadel here, both built around having legendaries, both enter untapped, which is nice. You've got the Scrying from Grey Havens there. The Great Hall of the Citadel, you do need to pay 1, but you can get 2 mana of any combination of colors, right? So you can only cast it for legendaries, but if you've got a legendary based deck, that's not too bad. We've got Fabled Pass, just been reprinted in Bloomburrow, so potentially going to go down in price. I think it's going to go down in price, right? And it's a nice one. You can stack it, search for a basic land, enters tapped, and then you can untap it if you've got 4 or more lands. Evolving and Terramorphic. I don't think I need to cover them too much. Sack it, find a basic land. Boom. We've got the Shire Terrace here. It's the same thing, but you can tap it for colors if you want, but you do need to pay 1 to be able to sack it. We've got Escape Tanel. This is a combination between, these cards and then also a mini rogues passage kind of thing. Only 2 power or less, but there's still uses for it, right? The Throne of Eldraine Commons. So these ones here all do a different thing. They enter untapped if you control 3 or more of whatever color it is. So say for the Mystic Sanctuary here, enters untapped if you control 3 or more other islands. They are, based on that color. So this is they are typed. So this is a plains. And they all do something interesting. And when they enter untapped, when they enter untapped, they all do something interesting. So Mystic Sanctuary will return a target instant or sorcery to your hand. Witch's Cottage, you can return a target creature from your graveyard to the top of your library. Dwarven Mine, create a 1/1 dwarf. Gingerbread Cabin here, create a food. And then Idyllic Grange, put a +1/+1 on target creature. They are very cheap. They all do something that is most likely going to be useful in whatever color you're in. If you're playing a blue deck, most likely it's not going to be bad if you get an instant or sorcery back to the top of your library. Yeah. And some other ones here. These are more niche. So Roadside Reliquary here. Pay 2, tap it, and sack it to draw a card if you have an artifact or artifact. And an enchantment, you draw another card. So, you could draw 2 cards for 2 here. Buried Ruin, pay 2, sack it, get an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Khan's Bastion, pay 4, proliferate. Nesting Grounds, we talked about in a previous video, really, really good. The Urza's ones here, if you've got a colorless deck, these are all going to be nice. The Urza's Tower, I believe, is the more expensive one, but all 3 are relatively cheap. The Urza's Cave is a new one here. Pay 3, sack it, search your library for a land. It's just a land, right? So you could find a Triome with this. You could find any useful card with this. Now, obviously, you need to pay 3 and sack it to be able to do it. But if you're paying 3 and sacking, then that's what? Is 3 visits, that's 3, right? Or 2? Yeah, 3 visits is 2, but that's only for a forest, right? There's a bunch of cards that you're going to be doing this with anyway. This is just a great way for you to be able to find any land. Triome, freaking, whatever broken land you've got in your deck, Field of Dead, whatever you want. Just go find it. So, I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know down below. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, and I did aim for very cheap cards, as I said. So correct me if you think that I'm wrong, or if you think that there's, a card or a card cycle that you think I missed here. Hope you guys had a wonderful day. Goodbye.